Hello, welcome to ISAT Daily. I'm Sarah, Patriot Lockstep,
And I'm Matt the Parable.
and we're gonna discuss the FBI infiltrating the Portland protests.
And basically rioting all over the place.
Yeah, the FBI deployed surveillance teams inside Portland protests. In the hours after President Joe Biden's inauguration this year, protesters marched once again through the streets of Portland, Oregon, sending a message that putting a Democrat in the White House would not resolve their problems with a system of policing and corporate wealth that they saw as fundamentally unfair. No cops, no prisons, total abolition, they chanted. Some of the activists dressed in the trademark uniform of solid black clothing and masks that often signals a readiness to make trouble without being readily identifiable, smashed windows at the local Democratic Party headquarters.
Yeah, so I think the giveaway is the black uniforms
Yeah.
and basically the abolition of anything related to police, and probably going after Democrats is going after government as well.
Yeah.
So it's Antifa.
It's peaceful though, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah, real peaceful.
Yeah.
There's the next slide. Let's take a look at that. So the event, like others that had consumed the city since the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis in 2020, included a variety of anarchists, anti-fascist communists, and racial justice activists. But there were other mingling in the crowd that day, plainclothes agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI set up extensive surveillance operations inside Portland's protest movement, according to documents obtained by the New York Times and current and former federal officials, with agents standing shoulder to shoulder with activists, telling vandalism suspects to guide the local police toward arrests and furtively videotaping inside one of the country's most active domestic protest movements.
I think they mean terrorist movement.
Yeah. These are not protest movements.
Yeah.
Groups like Antifa or BLM or many of the other groups out there, that even the ones that are on domestic terror organization lists, none of these people are out there to protest. They don't have any cause. They only have an agenda, and chaos and destruction are basically their platforms.
Right.
So let's take a look at the next slide.
Opportunists.
Yeah, right. They are opportunists.
There has been no evidence that the Bureau used similar surveillance teams on right-wing demonstrators during the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol, despite potential threats of violence against the heart of the federal government. Though the FBI did have an informant in the crowd that day, the Bureau has at times used secretive tactics to disrupt right-wing violence, such as efforts that led to charges against men accused of conspiring to kidnap Michigan's governor. The FBI has broad latitude to conduct surveillance when agents suspect threats to national security or that federal crimes may be committed. But Bureau guidelines warn that agents should not cross into actions that could have a chilling effect on legitimate protests and should instead prioritize less intrusive techniques.
Yeah, well, I think they've gone astray with the January 6th.
Yeah.
It's not even a protest.
And they had one person in the crowd that day. The crowd was like 1 million people. I am 100% sure they had a lot more in there than they're willing to admit.
Yeah, I think there was quite a few more.
And maybe they didn't see what they're trying to portray, and maybe that's why they don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll find out. And the good side to it is, little by little, that aspect of it is being brought to light in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So at least we're going to be able to see how it really proceeded. The January 6th committee, or the commission in D.C. that was established by Pelosi and some of her puppets, basically is not going to really lead us to a real fact-finding mission. But there's some others that are going through the process as well. So let's take a look at the next one. Oh, this is it. Okay. Police officers made more than 1,000 arrests during the course of the protests, and more than 200 people ultimately faced criminal prosecution. More than 100 cases had to be dropped because there was not sufficient evidence. In one case, FBI agents in plain clothing were credited to court records with helping catch a man accused of throwing Molotov cocktails at law enforcement officials. He faced federal explosives charges in addition to state charges that included attempted murder. The FBI teams continued their operations among Portland's far left activists for months at the end of 2020 and the start of 2021. While the FBI has also been investigating far right groups, some lawmakers have blasted the Bureau for failing to detect and blunt the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. So again, they're mentioning it as attack, and I think if you look at it comparatively speaking, the riots that took place throughout, L.A., Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and everybody, all the urban areas in between, basically. You can't really compare those two, but they're trying.
Yeah.
But I don't blame them. Might as well.
But ultimately, only 100 people faced prosecution.
And if you remember correctly, you had politicians on the left side of the aisle that was bailing out a lot of these people. And
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, for one. But there were others. There was, and let's not forget about Hollywood and all of progressives doing their best to catch and release these people so they can get back on the street and do more damage. So
yeah.
Let's take a look at the next slide.
FBI Director Christopher Wray told lawmakers in September 2020 that the Bureau was pursuing quite a number of properly predicated domestic terrorism investigations into violent anarchist extremists, any number of whom self-identify with the Antifa movement. The FBI is aggressively investigating people associated with the violent far-right groups such as Atomwaffen and The Base, and prosecutors have already brought charges against dozens of members of the far-right Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers militia in connection with the attack on the Capitol. Federal agents are actively pursuing additional cases against those groups, and further charges are likely to be filed. Mike German, a former FBI special agent who specialized in domestic terrorism and covert operations and is now a fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice, said that such surveillance operations inherently run the risk of violating the First Amendment rights. They should be used only when there is evidence that a serious crime may occur, he said, and they should be tailored to focus on obtaining the evidence needed to prosecute that crime.
Yeah, so, I think this kind of outlines what they're looking at. The only thing that I can really say that I don't necessarily agree with is, we checked on Atomwaffen. No one really heard of them or knew exactly
or
who they
the
were.
base.
Or the base, quite honestly. But Atomwaffen is listed as a National Socialist group. Yeah. And if anybody's familiar with National Socialism, they are not far right. It's Marxist. Anything socialist is Marxist, and that would be going over to the other side of the aisle. So they've renamed themselves, instead of Nazi, the Atomwaffen. So, other than that, though, it's standard information. They're trying to collect evidence, trying to collect information, and see what's going on here. So let's take a look at the next slide. Cannon, the former FBI supervisor in Portland, said the Bureau was indeed worried about acts of violence directed at the police, the potential that the protests could escalate, and toll the demonstrations were taking on the Portland Police Bureau, whose officers were fatigued after months of near nightly confrontations on the streets. This was a wave of protest-related crimes that had a severe impact on the community, Cannon said. There was a lot of pressure. It was a fraught situation. And, we have to take, besides the people of those areas, how it impacted small business.
Right.
There was a lot of damage. A lot of these people, they lost their livelihoods, I would imagine.
Yeah. A lot of them were minorities, too.
Yeah, exactly. So, but, groups like Antifa or BLM, they're not really concerned about color or helping out anybody, really. They're out there about setting their agenda ablaze, literally. So that's where we are. You know, it's amazing that this is coming out now. A lot of this between the January 6th Commission, and they're taking a closer look at one time, you remember that all of these riots that took place because of Antifa and BLM, a lot of these politicians basically denied that they even existed.
Yeah.
You know, and we saw images of media, the mainstream media like CNN, MSNBC. They're literally standing in the street while everything's burning behind them, and they're saying it's
Mostly
just a
peaceful.
protest,
It's mostly
peaceful protest going on.
Yeah, which I think there were some people peacefully protesting, but I think they were the great minority, you know, and definitely the destruction overpowered any sort of positive, potentially positive thing that was happening.
You know, and there was images, even like in Minneapolis after George Floyd, they had peaceful protests, and as they're going, people would peel off and throw bricks through windows, and they would confront them. And so, you know, there is a peaceful protest that did take place in the daytime usually, but nighttime was just a totally different.
You would think, though, that BLM or whoever was forming these peaceful protests would be more vocal against the destruction that was going on.
Right.
And maybe it's the media. Maybe they're, not making that, heard, their voices heard. But I would be, standing up and screaming like, we weren't a part of that. And, I don't know.
Well, I think, the black community was standing up and screaming, but, people seem to think that BLM, Black Lives Matter, has something to do with Black lives.
Yeah.
When in actuality, it has nothing to do with Black lives. It is basically an organization, a communist organization that was set up to send out their agenda.
Right.
And that's the only thing they're concerned about. So, this is what we learned. Here we are again, and all the questions that everybody had, back into 2020 and part of 2021 was, how could you not pay attention to what was happening?
Yeah.
And we're finding out little by little by little that some of those people, some of those organizations, some of those alphabet agencies are, going back and taking a look at this, and, we'll probably find that some of them are involved.
Yeah.
How could you not be, really? Some as far as stealthy surveillance, but others as in participants possibly. So who knows?
Who knows?
Exactly.
Maybe we'll find out, and maybe we won't.
Exactly. Maybe we won't. So please subscribe, like, and share, comment, and hit the notification bell if you can. Have a great day, folks.